Welcome to another episode of Modern Buddhist Practice. I'm Dr. Jared Jones, and we are continuing now with Foundation 5 of the Five Foundations of Buddhist Meditation. This is a series for city-dwelling lay people who'd like to be able to practice meditation to the greatest degree that they can. This particular section, we are going to be looking at how to reshape or sculpt all of the activity that's on the surface of the mind. So up to this point, we have more or less been training in concentration. And we have been expanding with every exercise our ability to generate a state of meditative concentration in a wider and wider and wider range of possible experiences. In this section, what we're going to now do is work with the last component of our being, besides the sort of energetic body and all of that, which we're not going to cover. We're going to work with the last element of our being that we haven't done much work with directly at all, which is mental content. Mental content. So mental content includes what we would consider in the West to be thoughts and emotions. Very, very powerful thoughts from a Buddhist perspective have a psychophysical effect, have a psychological and physical effect. So, for example, you feel anger in your body. When you get very angry, it sort of fills up your body. Maybe it starts around here and kind of radiates out until your whole body is just sort of filled or stewing in anger. And similarly, your mind is influenced. All of the activities of your mind then are under the influence of that anger at the same time. So very, very powerful thoughts create emotion. Furthermore, there is a recognition in the Buddhist psychological canon, as well as the Western canon, of what we might call embodied emotion, which is that certain systems in your body are predisposed to kicking off a strong emotional response. For example, I mean, if you can look it up for yourself, but if you just look at trauma-related therapies and such, you'll see that quite a bit of modern therapy for trauma involves working out the traumas that are in your body. So our mind creates associations and patterns that are stored in our body as sort of latent potential for an emotion to arise. And those can be much more challenging to deal with. However, we're already dealing with those to some degree by doing body scanning. So body scanning is one way to start clearing that junk out of the body emotionally. Especially if you're doing body scanning with releasing, like we've been practicing, that's very, very helpful for processing trauma out of the body. So the final thing that we really haven't worked with at all is the general emotional palette. What emotions and reactions and thoughts do you have from day to day as you're going through your activities? This we haven't really dealt with at all yet. So this section is now the final piece, and I would say in some ways, I wouldn't say it's the most profound piece, because without the pieces we've been working on, it doesn't have much effect. It's not very reliable, and it's not a vehicle to anywhere in particular. It's just something that we do naturally, but we do it by accident, and then we have emotions and thoughts and reactions that are totally out of control. So what we're going to be discussing today is what I call rumination meditation. Rumination meditation is one step below what would be called vipassana in a classical Buddhist context. So you've probably, some of you, heard this term vipassana, special insight meditation, mainly in a context that's quite modern and not really accurate to the oldest sort of ways of thinking about vipassana that we have. So just to give you a quick primer on that, vipassana, special insight, special seeing, means actually that you can already do full-on concentrated meditation, full-on. Full-on concentrated meditation is called shamatha, or calm abiding meditation, if we translate it into English. And calm abiding meditation is an extremely difficult accomplishment. Thankfully, for those of you who are interested, I can send you some videos on this, but there are some monks who seem to have this capability, or they're much closer than we are, certainly, and they can pretty easily sit in a meditative state for 8 or 10 hours without moving, right? Without need to adjust, or very little need to adjust, etc. So ultimately, calm abiding meditation, the stability meditation we've been training in, culminates in what's called shamatha, or calm abiding meditation. And that's the ability to enter a single point and concentrated state that is so powerful that your 5 senses, external senses, will turn off completely, and the only thing that's appearing to your mind is whatever you have concentrated the mind on. So this is a very powerful mind. Or if you were meditating on a little patch of skin inside your nostril, like you do with Foundation 1, literally the entire universe disappears from your perception, and the only thing that exists is this little tiny patch of skin, and that's all. That's the only thing there is. So in that state, the mind is not only concentrated, but highly lucid, highly aware, highly cognizant, and fresh. So when you're training in calm abiding, you train both in stability on the one hand. You can, if you're holding a cup of tea, you can hold it very still, but also lucidity, brightness. You have turned up the lights in the room, so you can see the teacup you're holding very still. You can now see it very clearly. Yes? So in order to do vipassana, special seeing, right? You already need to be able to hold the cup really still and turn the lights up really bright and look at the cup. If you can't do that, you're not going to see anything special about the cup. Or your seeing of the cup won't be very special, right? To be a little bit flippant about the issue. So vipassana, full-blown, is something you can only do if you have full-blown calm abiding. That's the bottom line. So what does full-blown vipassana look like? You enter a single-pointed concentrated state. You go through a series of observations and logical analysis of some issue. You arrive at the conclusion, and then you hold the mind on that conclusion. And you let the mind completely absorb 100% on that conclusion of that analysis using calm abiding meditation. And then resting in that is special insight, is clear seeing, yes? Because you're clearly seeing and having a special insight about some issue that you have arrived at the conclusion of on the basis of observation and analysis, right? So this makes sense out of the language. Rumination meditation is one step down from this, okay? So for folks like you and I, we don't have the ability to do full-on calm abiding meditation. We don't have the ability to do full-on vipassana meditation, and we certainly don't have the ability to bring those two together into a perfect union of practice in one session. So how do we develop that? Well, we need to start working on both the skill of single-pointed analysis, where we don't leave a single-pointed concentrated state while doing an analysis of some issue, and we need to cultivate stability, where we can hold the mind on each piece of the analysis, and finally we can hold the mind on the conclusion of the analysis, right? So then we can do analysis and concentrate, right? You see? So we need to develop both these skills. In Foundations 2, 3, and 4, we learned how to scan the body, scan the senses, scan the mind. So you're now aware of almost everything that makes up your body and mind. At least the parts you have access to, you're aware of most of what makes you up. So you're now in an excellent position to analyze the things that make you up. Because you should, if you've been training in the course up to this point, have the ability now to rest in a somewhat, for periods of time at least, somewhat non-conceptual state on vision, on sound, on smell, on taste, on the tactile sensations of the body, and on awareness itself. Now that's a very high bar, but if you can do a little bit of each one of those, well, now you're in a great position to observe, and now we can add on the analysis, which is rumination meditation, right? So now we're combining that stability with the ability to do analysis for the first time in the practice. So rumination meditation, Foundation 5, really important. It is the thing, according to Buddhism, that can lead you from where you are now to the final realizations of the practice. Of course, you need to combine it with some other things to take it all the way, but it is indispensable, indispensable. So without further ado, let us get into the text. Right. So what is the meditative competency that we're developing with rumination meditation? We're developing the ability to combine focus, which we just talked about, and analysis. Why are we doing that? To reshape deliberately our concepts, perceptions, and emotions. Thus, through reshaping those deliberately, we can perfect cultivate at least, but according to Buddhism, also perfect numerous understandings, intentions and motivations, and other beneficial mental activities, etc. Furthermore, we can also completely overcome, according to Buddhism, but at least make some progress against various negative mental states. So that is why we are doing rumination meditation. So, what are the prerequisites? To do rumination meditation at the level that I'd like to teach it, which is why it's at Foundation 5 and not Foundation 1, your mind must be, generally speaking, you need to be able to put your mind where you want it to go and then hold it there for a while. So that's Foundation 1, right? We trained in that in Foundation 1. Next, you need to be able to non-conceptually observe various objects in a fixed pattern. So you can put the mind somewhere, hold it there non-conceptually, move it, hold the mind there non-conceptually, move it again, hold the mind there non-conceptually. So now, with Foundation 2 and 3, you have begun the process of learning how to do a non-conceptual analysis, or a largely non-conceptual analysis, let's say, because it's not completely non-conceptual, of some aspect of your own being and your own reality. So I would say those are the basic prerequisites and foundations. It certainly helps if you've done some of Foundation 4, because then you can do that type of systematic analysis of any of your senses, and you should at least have a taste of what consciousness is like when you're concentrating and there's not much mental activity going on besides what it is you're focused upon, right? Sort of the mind's very quiet and you're able to just notice that, my mind, there's nothing occurring in my mind. My mind is just aware and clear. That's it. So I wrote a tremendous amount of information in this document I'm going to send you for this part of the course that I'm not going to cover today, because I want to stay really focused and tight and teach you just about rumination. However, it's important to note that in the main tradition in which I have studied, which was founded by Lama Tsongkhapa, the main sort of application that they have, one of the main applications certainly, is this Lamrim tradition, stages of the path. So in this class of texts, and there are 18 great Lamrims in the Gelug Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there are 18 sort of versions and different lengths of texts in this Lamrim tradition of the Gelug that are considered sort of the very best of the system. And what they do is lay out, if you're a totally ordinary person starting from nothing, you don't even believe in Buddhism, how do you go from there all the way to being a fully enlightened Buddha? Step by step. What do you need to cultivate, and in what order do you need to cultivate it? There is a similar way of laying out the path where they put some things in a different order in the other Tibetan Buddhist schools. Furthermore, I don't know that it's laid out exactly this way because I haven't studied it in great detail, but if you look at Buddhapalita's 5th century text from the Thai forest tradition, you also find that the commentarial tradition for the Theravada includes things that are very similar to this, where they because the sutras are not really laid out as a start to finish path. They're sort of episodic. They're like an episode of teaching, each of them. And the Vinaya is mostly about ethics. And then there's the Jataka tales, which talk about past lives. And there's all these different sets of scriptural texts. But then there's this whole other section called Abhidharma, where they're trying to work out things that weren't talked about fully, and they're trying to put the path in a logical order from beginning to end. And then on the back of those Abhidharma texts, there's also the commentarial tradition outside of the Tripitaka, the 3 baskets of teaching, which is the Vinaya, the Suttas or Sutras, and the Abhidharma. Outside of that are commentaries like Buddhapalita's commentary, the Path of Purification, it's called, where you have the path, it's seemingly, at least to me, laid out from beginning to end. So you understand how to go from where you are all the way to the end of the path, right? So that's Lamrim. So what's really important about Lamrim is this, and this whole section we're going to be discussing today, that I haven't counted them all, but it seems like a very, very, very large number of realizations, meditative realizations actually, but actualizations of capabilities and internal states that are beneficial, etc., that a great number of those happen before you're a great meditator. And some of my students who have gone through some of my other courses on compassion and loving kindness, who have worked with me to develop patience, who have worked with me to develop better motivation to do practice, etc., 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 understands immediately when I say this, all of those really important changes to your psychology, your motivation, your attitude happen before you are able to do really profound stabilizing meditation, before you have calm abiding / shamatha meditation, much less before you can do full-blown vipassana as I described in the introduction. Okay? I can't say it any more plainly than that. One of the important lineage masters in Tibet is a gentleman by the name of Dromtonpa, who was the lay disciple of a very important scholar from India, Venerable Atisha. Venerable Atisha was from the Nalanda tradition of Indian Buddhism, which is sort of the height of Indian Buddhist practice. And as far as I know, I think they had both Theravada and Mahayana practices and Buddhist Tantra all being practiced under one roof at Nalanda Monastery. Furthermore, Nalanda Monastery was, according to accounts written by scholars who traveled there from around the world to visit it, had one of the largest libraries in the world. You could probably compare it to the Library of Alexandria. It was just a repository of the greatest knowledge everyone had produced in the world at that time, as long as they had come in contact with Nalanda and blah, 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 right? There's a pretty funny story, actually. I think it was an architect from China who came and visited Nalanda, and he said that the librarian at Nalanda Monastery's library knew more about architecture than he did. and that was just the librarian. Anyways, so Venerable Atisha was considered to be amongst, I think it was the top 500 scholars in his day at Nalanda. And the king of Tibet invited Atisha, who, if we are to believe the Tibetans, was considered to be the greatest among the 500 of those scholars, to come to Tibet and help fix Buddhism, which had begun to decline in Tibet after several hundred years of its first introduction. Right, so it was introduced, I think, in the 7th century or thereabouts, and then it declined after a while, and then Venerable Atisha came and did a second wave, a new wave of teaching. So one of his most important students was Dromtonpa, was a layperson, and at one time Dromtonpa was talking with some of the other students, and it was pointed out, I believe by Atisha himself, that Dromtonpa had greater realizations than some of the other students there, even though Dromtonpa wasn't as good at meditation, which is a really fascinating anecdote. And it's not isolated. If you go through the Theravada canon, if you go through the suttas and you go through the sutras, you'll see over and over and over again that people just come to a teaching of the Buddha and they have profound realizations just listening to the Buddha give a teaching. If you read the biographies of great masters, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said the first time he had a realization of selflessness, he was reading a book. He was reading a book at the time. Some of my own teachers said that on the debate courtyards, because the Tibetans, they do this, especially the Gelug, they do this really intense debate tradition that they inherited from the Nalanda Monastery. So while they're doing these debates, these formal back and forth debates, quite a few of them gain realizations of the Buddhist path during the debate. So rumination meditation, as I'm describing it here, is something that can happen anywhere, really, simply by thinking through an issue with as much concentration as you can, and then holding the conclusion of that in your mind with as much clarity as you can and stability as you can for a period of time. That's it. So to say that one more time, rumination meditation means thinking through something with the best evidence and observations and reason that you can. And you can do that by reading a book, listening to a teaching, and then stopping and thinking it through a bit and then carrying on. You can do it by looking at images. You can do it by analyzing art. You can do it in a half a dozen different ways. But the key is you do it with focus. You do it as systematically as you can without your mind running off to Walmart. And when you reach the conclusion where something has really changed in your mind, you hold that conclusion with concentration, with as much lucidity and energy as you can. So the reason I brought up Dromtonpa is if you think about what a translator has to do, they have to listen. First of all, they have to understand the Dharma, the Buddhist Dharma in this case, in 2 different languages. They have to listen to a teacher repeat a teaching again and again to different audiences, and then hear what they're saying, translate it into another language, understand the critical definitions of terms in different languages, and then translate it in a meaningful way to the audience, right? So they have this attentiveness and focus as they're listening and translating. Then they're vividly understanding in a scholarly way the meanings of various terms and the connections between those terms. And then probably also on their own time, they're developing slightly better ways over and over and over again of saying and translating the concept into other language. So this requires a lot of thinking and a lot of concentration on what you're thinking and saying and doing. So much of Buddhism, I like to say sort of colloquially, much of Buddhism happens before you have concentration. So before you can do profound concentration, a huge amount of the path, the Buddhist path, is going to take place. Yeah. So the general gist of how to do rumination meditation, I'm going to circle back to what to ruminate on, is that you can do it you can focus on one of 2 things, okay? You can either focus on what's called an objective object or a subjective object. So in this case, to keep it simple, if you visualize an apple, that is an object in your mind, right? So your mind is sort of over here, and the apple you're visualizing is over here, so to speak, and you're observing the apple. It's not really like that, but it's objective to your awareness. The apple's not your awareness, and the awareness is not the visualized apple. But you can't pull them apart, obviously, but they're not one and the same thing. So that would be an objective object. So a visualized apple, the understanding of impermanence, the understanding of selflessness or emptiness. What else? The preciousness. Well, no, that has a lot of emotional aspects. I mean, there's all these topics in the Lam Rim, like the preciousness of a human rebirth. Some of those are objective objects. Some of them are subjective objects. So what is a subjective object then? If it's not a correct concept of something or a correct understanding of something, that would be an objective object. A subjective object is when you generate the mind itself into a particular state, into a particular attitude, into a particular emotion or reaction, so that you are practicing that emotion, state of mind, or reaction, or attitude. You know, we could use a whole host of different words, but the point is to think of this by way of analogy. At some point in our lives, none of us cared about politics. At some point when we were children, none of us cared about politics at all. And now, without thinking about it for more than 5 seconds, everybody in the room could raise their hand and name 3 issues they would maybe not kill or die for, but about which they feel very, very, very strongly. Yes? So, how did we get from a place where we were carefree and oblivious as children to a place where we have very strong positive emotions and probably more so very strong negative emotions about a whole bunch of stuff that's happening in our environment, in our lived environment or distant environment, like a war happening in some place, or that's really far removed from us, or whatever the case may be. How did we go from having no feelings about these issues to having feelings about them, and having strong feelings and attitudes and reactions to them? Well, to be slightly flip about the thing, we thought about it, right? We thought about it. We thought about it until we had strong reactions about it. And we connected those thoughts we had about it to experiences, and to images, and to symbols, and to art, and to music, right? We connected a whole bunch of meaningful ideas and images and symbols in our mind. And now, as soon as we hear climate change, bang, we go, oh, climate change. Yeah, oh gosh. Or we hear, war in the Middle East. We go, oh, war in the Middle East. Oh, right? So I'm not picking any sides on politics here. I'm just using these as examples, okay? Whether you feel positively or negatively, the point is that we got to the point where we have a strong attitude because we thought about it and connected it to various experiences and reasons and arguments and these sorts of things. How do we maintain the strength of that? Well, we continue to watch the news and read articles about it, and to think about it, and to argue with people on the internet about it, and to debate, right? Like the Tibetans. Maybe not as good as the Tibetans, but to do some debates on the internet maybe about these issues. Okay, so this is how we got from having no reaction as a child, and you hear war in the Middle East, you go, okay, when's lunch? And now you hear the same words, and there's probably emotions there. Right. So this is informal rumination meditation, you could say. The word for meditation in Tibet is this word gom, G-O-M. And that's quite similar to the word bhavana in Sanskrit, which I think is also the same word in Pali, if I'm not mistaken. And they're very, very similar words. That means to become familiar with something, or in the case of bhavana, to bring something new into existence, to develop something, right? So you're going to, with meditation, so-called, you're going to develop something or bring something new, some new quality into existence, or you're going to become familiar with something. So in this case, through studying politics and watching the news over and over and doing the arguments online and all this, you have become familiar with a particular emotional reaction, a particular attitude, a particular mental approach to an issue. So we could have taken a different mental approach to the issue, but we study the reasons over and over again to take this perspective instead of this one. And then we develop a lot of emotions about holding this perspective and a lot of emotions about not holding this one. And then the people over here, they're bad, and we're the heroes. Okay, I digress. So I use that example because it's easy to understand. At some point you didn't have these feelings and reactions and emotions, and now you do, and the difference comes mainly from just thinking about it and going through the reasoning and having discussions about it, etc. So that's sort of informal rumination, which leads to a change in perspective, a change in attitude, a change in motivation, a change in intent, etc. Formal rumination meditation on a subjective object, right? Because we're talking about changes in attitude, perspective, etc., would be something more like universal loving kindness or compassion or patience, charitability, gratitude, etc. For these meditations, one systematically generates the mind into that state using a combination of observations, experiences, thoughts. I might change that later to say sort of arguments, good reasons, right, to hold that perspective and that attitude. And then when that attitude genuinely arises in your mind, not like, oh yeah, I get it, because getting it is a mental image. That's an objective object, right? When it actually arises as an attitude in your mind and it fills up your body in the same way that overwhelming anger or outrage fills your whole body up, makes you want to pick things up and throw them, right? In the same way that those negative emotions fill up your mind, fill up your body, they motivate your actions, you deliberately cultivate good qualities until they do the same thing. To get to the point where they have that driving quality, first, you need to generate your mind into that state for the first time using observations, experiences, good arguments, etc. Once you've generated it, then you just hold it for a period of time. That's it. So the first skill in rumination meditation, which we have not covered, is required, right? So the first skill that you need to do this, to make these radical transformations, is rumination. Being able to think through an issue until either a correct understanding arises or until a new attitude, a new motivation, new intent, new perspective on the issue arises. Okay? So I would definitely recommend reading this, but I'm not going to read it out for you here and now. Just to show you, this is under the formal and informal rumination section. You definitely want to read this whole paragraph. You can pause if you'd like and read this whole thing on your own. Right. So this leads to this whole issue of contrived and uncontrived realizations, or constructed and unconstructed realizations. What does this mean? A constructed or contrived realization, and contrived has a negative connotation I don't like. Constructed is probably better. Means that, for example, if you wanted to have a gut-wrenching, body-filling, overwhelming feeling that absolutely every single sentient being should have all temporary and permanent sources of happiness and all the causes for temporary and permanent happiness, And that from the bottom of your being, it's filling you up from your toes to the top of your head. If you want to have that right this second, that's probably impossible. You can understand it. You can understand why it would be a good thing to do. You can correctly understand the definition that I've just provided. But probably, unless you've trained in this, you can't just generate that because you want it to occur in your mind. So you have to, again, I think contrive is the wrong word because you're not faking it, but you have to build it. You have to construct it. So, as Pavanka Rinpoche, very important, relatively recent lineage holder in my lineage, says, it's a spiritual, a contrived realization is a spiritual awareness that arrives after continuous reflection on many scriptural citations and reasonings, but which fails to arise without such reflection. This is a contrived experiential realization. So, why is it called an experiential realization? Because you have generated the actual experience, but you had to basically put in work to build it. Yeah, you had to construct it. So, just as an example, there's a wonderful book called How to Expand Love by the Dalai Lama, which has both secular and religious contemplations for generating universal loving kindness and universal compassion, and even further than that. So it's it has a little bit of the Lam Rim at the beginning. So you have all these contemplations related to the Lam Rim, and then you have all these ones specifically tailored to increasing love and compassion, and some mental states that are beyond love and compassion. So if you were to read that book, you would see that he has a series of systematic contemplations, and what you're meant to do is to spend time with each one of those until there is an actual shift in your attitude. Okay? And when that shift in attitude occurs from thinking about the reason, you could rely on a bunch of scriptural sources from Buddhism. You could rely on reasoning. You could rely on observation and memory from things you've experienced in the past, all to bring into being, to construct a new attitude about all sentient beings everywhere. Right? You could do it. You could do it like this. If you do it like that, and you actually construct, wow, may all sentient beings actually have, may they have what they need. May they have what they want as long as it's virtuous. May they have the very best of absolutely everything, both temporary and ultimate. Right? When you get a taste of that and it comes up and it fills your being entirely, right? Then, just like holding the mind on the breath, you hold the mind in that state. And then it'll be sort of like this. You construct loving kindness, for example, and here's your mind sort of fusing and infusing with loving kindness, right? So that there's sort of one thing for a period of time. And then over the course of a few minutes, this starts to sort of fade and fade and fade until your mind is back to relative normality. And then you think about the reasons again. Okay, there's this reason, there's that reason, there's this experience I had, and there's this thing I read over here, and oh yes, this reason, and wow, yeah, okay, wow. And then bang, loving kindness occurs again in your mind and sort of fuses with your mind, fills up your whole being, and you go, oh yes, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have that. How wonderful it would be if they have that. May I take personal responsibility so that they can have that. And you hold it, fused, suffusing, marinating in it. And then as it starts to fade, you go through the reasons again, right? So this is how you would do a session of rumination meditation. We've talked a lot in the past about how do you do a session of this, a session of that. Rumination meditation, probably because we don't have great concentration, you have a book in front of you, or you've taken notes from a bunch of places and you put them in one place because those are the reasons that really make your mind do something. So you make your own practice manual where you know what the steps are to generate loving kindness, for example, but you take reasons from different texts, different sources, maybe even non-Buddhist things, whatever it is that actually makes your attitude change viscerally. And you think about the first reason until bang, your attitude, you go, wow, yes, it is like that. And then the next one, okay, wow, yes, they definitely do have this. And then the next one, yeah, they absolutely do deserve loving kindness. They absolutely do deserve it, and I need to do what I can to bring them into states of temporary and ultimate happiness. And then when you finally generate that state of mind, you hold it for as long as you can, and the intensity will decrease and decrease and decrease and decrease and decrease. And then when it's pretty low or gone, then you start over. Okay, this reason. Okay, that reason. Okay, that reason. Wow, yes. My whole body, my whole mind suffused with loving kindness. Bang, holding it. So loving kindness is one example. But the whole Lam Rim is filled with other examples. And you could go through the entire Lam Rim like this. And you do every topic until either the objective object that you're supposed to arrive at, or until the subjective object, the change in attitude or whatever that you're supposed to have occurs. And then you keep meditating on that and holding it and doing it again and again, day after day. Sometimes within days, it comes up and then it's there long term. Sometimes it takes you years to develop something. When an attitude that you have been cultivating, like loving kindness, arises distinctly as soon as you bring the subject to mind, irrespective of prolonged reflection, then that is an uncontrived or unconstructed experiential realization. Okay? So when it arises directly as soon as you bring the subject to mind, with or without prolonged reflection, with or without having to go through reasoning, example, scriptural citation, blah, blah, blah. When it simply occurs as soon as you bring loving kindness to mind, a bit like raising your arm, as soon as you raise your arm, you go, I'd like to raise my arm now, and you just raise your arm. So when loving kindness can be generated by just going, okay, loving kindness now, that's an uncontrived realization. Furthermore, when loving kindness automatically occurs without deliberate effort in situations where it's relevant, well, now it's becoming, even beyond just an uncontrived realization, it's becoming like a pervasive realization, a pervasive actualization of some internal capability that is, well, I guess if I'm saying it's pervasive, I've already said it's coming out all over you. It's how do I say? Let me start over. So if loving kindness begins to come up automatically, not only is it uncontrived, but now it's becoming more and more profound, let's say, because throughout the course of your day, when loving kindness is relevant, it just comes up by itself, right? So now it's automatic. Not only can you bring it up when you want it, but eventually through practice, it comes up when it's needed automatically, right? And this comes through rumination meditation. You think about it, you generate it, and then you hold it with concentration, as I described a minute ago. And at first, it's just constructed, and it takes a lot of effort, and it goes away really quickly, and you can't bring it back when you want to. And then at some point, you can bring it up with almost no reflection at all, or no reflection at all. And then eventually, it comes up automatically whenever it's relevant. For those of you who have done martial arts, trained in dance, trained in music, for those of you who have done the rest of this course and gone from not being able to focus on your nostril to being able to do really complicated meditative stuff, when you're building up a new skill, you start basically not being able to do it at all, and it's really awkward. And then you can do it with a lot of effort and thinking about it. And then you can do it almost automatically. And then you can do it automatically. right? This is the natural progression of any skill. And these profound realizations of universal loving kindness, universal compassion, of bottomless patience and perseverance, of an intensely generous spirit, all of these things come through this kind of training. And if you were to take the Lamrim approach to this, or a similar approach, then not only do you generate those kinds of things, but you would also generate, for example, the realization of impermanence, which is a correct understanding of how composed things, constructed things, like the body, like these, etc., exist. They what technically we would say they lack stasis. There is nothing static or in stasis within these objects or within my body, for example. That's that realization where your automatic mental approach to everything that is a composed object is one of seeing it as not being in stasis. Let me say that again, because that was complicated. You have to use rumination meditation if you want your automatic mental approach to everything that is impermanent, right? These things are impermanent. If you want your automatic approach to be to them mentally and emotionally to be that's impermanent, then you have to train in it. You have to train in it by ruminating on it, focusing on the conclusion, holding the conclusion again and again and again until that's just how you see everything all the time, right? So this is how you realize impermanence. It's not like Buddha reaches his hand down and gives you the realization or something. And the same is true for selflessness. The same is true for the Buddhist concept of what's called emptiness, which is, for the fancy folk among you, that is ontology, not an epistemological state. In other words, it's not like your mind is just empty of contents or something. That's not what that means. Emptiness is talking about the fact that when you look for anything that exists independent of all other causes and conditions, you can't find such a thing. That everything that exists within a web of causes and conditions, which brings it into being, sustains its existence, and causes it to go out of existence eventually. And that includes us, right? So we are selfless in the sense that when you look for a self that is independent of a web of causal factors, you don't find one. There's no such thing. And for those of you who are interested in rebirth and karma, the reason you, quote unquote, can be reborn is that you have a continuum of consciousness that is a series of causes and conditions that can take another rebirth. But there's no independent you amongst those changing causes and conditions of mind and karma, of consciousness and karma, etc. There's no additional piece called Jared in there that I can pull out and go, there I am. There's just karma, consciousness, the body, etc. Right? So to realize that, we need to think about it, look at scriptural citations, look at reason, look at direct non-conceptual observation, and do very specific types of analysis, which we're not going to cover today, and then arrive at the conclusion, yes, I am empty of that kind of independent self that can be utterly separated from all other causes and conditions. There is no such self like that. I do have a normal sort of self made of all these changing things, but there's no independent self that exists utterly separate from body and mind. Yeah? So you achieve those kinds of objective objects of meditation, correct understandings of stuff, correct views, Buddhism would call them, through, at least at our stage of practice, through rumination meditation. Okay? So I can't talk this technique up enough. I'm going to let you read the vast majority of those, and I'm just going to talk about doing a formal session one more time with a little bit more detail, okay? So you can do rumination meditation a bit like we were doing body scanning, okay? So that they're similar in some ways. So let's say we were working on the first major topic of the Lam Rim. There's also the contemplations on the fact that the guru is a Buddha, but none of us are, I'm assuming there's not a bunch of great Buddhist tantrikas in the audience, so seeing the guru as a Buddha is not a sutra level practice. That's a tantric practice. Okay, so the first sort of major topic besides having respect for your teacher is called the 18 Freedoms and Fortunes of a Precious Human Rebirth. If you search that on the internet, you will find this teaching described in great detail, and you can see what each of the 18 freedoms and fortunes is, okay? So to do rumination meditation, you can do it, in my opinion, 3 sort of major ways. And this isn't described anywhere, but it is, at least in my experience, sort of the 3 big ways I have figured out how to do this practice. The first is, you would do a complete overview of all 18 points, for example. You would start at point number 1. You would think about the reasons and arguments and scriptural citations, etc., that make that point actually valid in reality, until your attitude changes and matches point number 1, where you go, wow, yeah, that's absolutely true, and you should have a feeling like, wow, there's real import and significance to point number 1. Wow. Okay. And then you do number 2, and you do that for a few minutes. Then you do number 3, do that for a few minutes, do number 4, and it's almost like going to a tapas restaurant, like a Spanish tapas restaurant, and you have one bite of each thing. Or like a sushi restaurant, and you get the nigiri. Nigiri normally comes in 2 pieces, but it's like getting to try one piece of 18 different types of nigiri, right? So you taste each one. You don't just understand each one and move on. You actually generate each mind for a few minutes. That's 1. Let's say you've been doing that for a while. Well, now you could not do all 18, maybe number 7 or number 12, really messing you up. You get there, you feel nothing, you're not moved, you're not compelled. So you spend a lot of time thinking about it, reasoning about it. Think about it like politics, right? You go on the internet, you debate some guy about it, you read an article about it, you watch a video on it, you read a couple like excerpts from some articles written on it, whatever, until you have an attitude related to that point. An actual shift in attitude related to that point. And then you hold that shift in attitude and you go, okay, yes, it's definitely like that, and I have to factor that into my decision-making process. Human life is precious because of that point. Wow, so precious, right? The rebirth that I have now, the human life I have now, so precious because of point number 12. Wow, incredibly precious because of that, that point 12. Wow. And when you have gotten some movement on that point, you hold it, and then it'll fade, and then you generate it again, and then it'll fade, and then you generate it again, and it'll fade, blah, blah, blah. Just like we were talking about with loving kindness. And then, number 3, again, sort of like body scanning, where you're doing this pattern. It's a bit like going through all 18 points, right? You're going through all 18 points of preciousness of a human rebirth, for example, or you're scanning the body at the same speed, spending the same amount of time on each part, and just letting the mind get as far as it can into each part as you go through, right? That's technique number 1. Technique number 2 is you can't get your mind into your shoulder, so you just sit there and let your mind sort of soak into your shoulder. So this is similar to point number 2, where you're just looking at point number 12 of preciousness of a human rebirth and spending a lot of time on it. Number 3 is you're doing a body scan, and then you get to the shoulder, which is your problem area, and you just spend a little more time there. And then you carry on with the pattern, right? So that's the third technique. Similarly, you're going through the 18 points of preciousness of human rebirth, and you do points number 1 to 11. You get to point number 12, which is your problem point, and you spend a little more time there. And then you do 13 to 18. You see? So by training you in body scanning, I've also trained you in how to do rumination meditation, broadly speaking. So there is more that could be said, but I'm going to leave these additional notes for you to read on your own. To bring in a point from Zen, beginner's mind. You should, even after you've made a huge amount of progress in any particular area of moving your mind, changing your attitude, developing whatever aspect of the path, you should always sort of feel with some part of yourself, I'm still sort of at the beginning with this. And the reason for that is because in a really important sense, there's no end point to that training. There's a huge amount of mind training, of dharma, of things that have been left to us by the great meditators of the past that are oriented in this way, right? What way are they oriented? Where there's really no end point to the training. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper. You can expand it. You can add more detail over here on the left side. You can keep everything where it was, but shift the perspective to the left by like 3 degrees. Wonderful example of that in my own life is my PhD was on Madhyamaka Prasangika emptiness, which is a very, very difficult philosophical school of emptiness philosophy and Buddhism. And throughout my research, of course, I was defending that position from mainly Western philosophers. And then I was applying it to new areas in Western thought. But it occurred to me during my research that the Chittamatra view, which is supposedly a step down from the Prasangika view, actually gets a fair number of things right about how the mind works that Prasangika doesn't mention at all. And those need to be taken into account when you're working with your own mind and thinking through issues related to training your own mind. And so that's sort of an example where I still consider Prasangika to be the best. I haven't found a school of thought that is so explanatory of absolutely anything. No other school I've ever encountered. Prasangika is the best. But I have shifted 3 degrees to the left in saying Prasangika actually doesn't describe everything that's worth knowing. How do I put this? Prasangika doesn't describe everything that's worth knowing in terms of training your mind. That the other schools, if you study them well, train in them, work through them well, are providing extremely important information, all within their own right. And so you should study them and bring them into your practice. So just one example, right? That being said, there's a huge number of subjects that are, in the end, meant to create absolute certainty. That's part of what makes gives you what's called Vajra determination, Vajra, unbreakable determination to bring your realizations and your practices to fruition. It's the certainty that your practice will come to fruition if you do certain things, and that doing that is worth it, right? That is what creates powerful, powerful, powerful motivation. So, it's a bit of a contradiction, But I think it's worthwhile to keep both of these tools in your mind, that there's no endpoint, and yet you need to be developing profound certainty in certain aspects of your mental attitudes. And whether or not that certainty is a practical matter or a matter of absolute truth is something we could debate, I suppose, another day. Right. Well, thank you for attending the last official teaching for the 5 foundations of meditation. This is the first time I've done this course, and hopefully it's been beneficial and useful to those of you who have attended. The unofficial portion of this course will probably carry on for those of you who are interested. We can continue keeping up in the chat group that I have for this course. And also there are, 200 or 400 pages, something like this, of additional material that goes into a huge amount of detail about calm abiding, vipassana, about different types of cognitive states that are really important and how you define them and how you attain them, as well as practical advice for, if you're living in the world as a layperson, how do you arrange your life so that you can do practice at a relatively high level? That's all detailed in the rest of advice for city-dwelling lay people, from which I have pulled these 5 foundations of meditation. So hopefully I will be seeing you again very soon. Thank you for making it this far, and I hope this has been helpful. Please do leave some comments in the comments section if you're watching this later on YouTube, and I will reply to them in due course. Once again, I'm Dr. Jared Jones. Thank you for coming. Hope to see you very soon.